Welcome to today's webinar, Batch Processing in FCS Express 6. I'm Kaya Ghosh. I'm a Technical Application Specialist with Novo Software. Also on the line we have Andrea Val, who's also with Novo Software, and he's an expert in FCS Express, and he'll be answering your questions in the questions and answer window. So don't be shy. We love getting your questions because we like to know if we're covering what you really wanted to see in today's webinar. And like I said, if it's something that is something we can answer in the course of the webinar, I'll do so verbally. If not, or if it's too involved or slightly off topic, we'll follow up with you offline. So please do enter those in as questions come up. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to cover today. So FCS Express can batch process your samples to several output formats with a single click. And I'm showing you some of the output formats here. On the left, you can see a picture of the different formats. So we have print. You can print directly to your printer. We can save the layout, multiple copies of the layout, although you probably don't really need that anymore. Save to PowerPoint, PDF. We can save pictures. If you want to save a bunch of TIFFs or JPEGs and just keep them in a folder, we can do that. And we can also send your exports out to Excel. Okay, there's a few other formats down here which I probably won't get into today just because they're not used as frequently, but if you do have a question about that, just let me know. Okay, so the advantage of batch processing is that it can save you time in setting up your layout. That's compared to making replicate pages and plots for all your samples, which you can do in FCS Express. But generally, if you have several samples, anywhere from several samples to hundreds or thousands of samples, batch processing is really the way to go. The other reason that you want to do batch processing is that it's less error prone than hand copying statistics and other information outside of the software. So a lot of times in various data analysis software packages, you see people getting their statistics and just using the clipboard or even worse, just manually typing in that statistic into different Excel columns and then doing their data manipulation from there. So you can imagine that that is actually pretty error prone and it does use up a lot of your time. And just to note, I don't want to get too off topic, but you can make bar plots and regression plots and pie charts and all those kinds of things in FCS Express now. So in many cases, you don't even really need to go out to Excel, but we have a whole separate webinar about that. So I probably will not talk about that today, only tangentially. Okay? So in this webinar, we're going to go through several things. I think it probably will take the better part of an hour, but just briefly, these are the things we're going to cover. We're going to create a batch process for a simple layout, i.e. one file per iteration, one FCS file per iteration, and export those results to Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, and your printer. We'll also show you how to create a batch process for a more complex layout, and that's when you have, for example, histogram overlays showing multiple FCS files, or even if you have multiple FCS files per iteration. And I'll explain what an iteration is in a moment, but to try to put it in plain English, what I mean by that is, let's say you want to batch process the results of 10 patients, and every patient has 3 tubes. In that case, you want your batching logic to be basically 3 by 3 rather than 1 by 1 because every patient has 3 separate FCS files. So that's an example of a more complex layout, and I'll show you how batch processing can take care of that scenario as well. Thirdly, we'll talk about batch options and batch run modes, and that enables you to adjust and review the gating positions for each sample. Okay, so by default, FCS Express will just have the same gating positions for all of your samples, but you can put in a pause, and that way that pause during the batch process will allow you to change the gates, the quadrants, the markers, so that it fits the populations if they're shifting around within your data set. In FCS Express 5 and 6, you can use snapshots to remember your gating positions for each sample. So that means if you've set the gating positions using the batch options, individually for each sample. You can later recapture those gating positions. Even if you close and reopen the layout, FCS Express will remember what you did, so you can reproduce it exactly. New in FCS Express 6, we have these tiling options for PowerPoint, PDF, and print, and those are all the visual exports that FCS Express batch processing gives you. And what that will allow you to do is visually compress your results onto fewer pages or slides. Okay, so by default, FCS Express will send out one iteration per page of your PDF or per slide of your PowerPoint. But if you've got a lot of data files and you want to maybe squeeze that in, that's what this tiling option will do. So it's sort of comparable to when you print multiple pages per page on a printer. Okay? And lastly, we'll talk about reusing your layout as a template for future experiments. Okay, and that's something you can do with any layout. There's nothing special you have to do, but I'll just show you the steps that you can take to make it easy on yourself. Okay? If anyone has any questions, let me know. You probably don't at this point because it's just the outline of what we're going to do, but you know, feel free. Feel free to shout out any questions that you have in the questions and answer box. Okay, so let's open up a new layout because before I actually launch into the batch process itself, I want to talk a little bit about the data list. Okay, and that's going to clear up what I mean about iterations in a moment. I see a question coming in about what does an iteration mean. Yeah, this discussion's just for you. So the data list is your list of data files, as you can imagine, and that's available here on the batch tab. Okay, right here, data list. Or it's available on the data tab, appropriately enough. Wherever you open it up, it's the same thing. Okay, so the data list right now it's empty because this is a new layout. But as soon as I put in a new data file, so let's insert a plot on my layout up here. Okay, so I put in one data file here, and you can see that the data list has now been populated by all of the other data files that are in that folder. Okay, and you see that there's an iteration column here on the left. So the iteration column, to iterate literally means, if you look it up in the dictionary, it literally means to repeat, to do again, over and over. So an iteration is basically the file that is going to be, as you advance through the data list, the files get iterated through the plots, and FCS Express will apply the same analysis, the same gates, the same plots, the same statistical analysis to all of them. So I can advance through my iterations by clicking on the next previous button here on the data tab. Okay, so you can see the file name changing in the plots, right? And you can also see in blue highlighted what iteration I'm on. So there's 9 iterations in this data list because there were 9 files in my original plot. You can also use this iteration drop-down menu right here, up here in the upper right of the data list, and you can jump to non-consecutive iterations. Okay, so now I'm on the 7th iteration, now I'm on the 4th iteration. Okay, and so this is a really simple layout because I just have one file per iteration. But what I'll do after we set up a simple batch process with this type of simple layout, we'll do a more complex layout, which is basically where you have multiple files per iteration. So it's like that example I gave you before where you might have 10 patients, but every patient has 3 different FCS files. So we'll set up a layout like that where you would have multiple files per iteration, and in that case you'd have, you know, multiple plots on your layout, and they might be showing all different files. Okay, so I think you'll see when I show you the actual example, but just getting back to the data list itself, when you're doing a batch process, it's important to define the files you want to work with in the data list. So if you don't want to work with all the files that got added initially, you can just delete some of them out. You can hit delete on your keyboard, or you can use this red X. Okay, and now I only have 6 iterations in my data list. You can even add in different data files from disparate folders. So I'm going to go to a completely different folder now, this one for example, and I'll add in these 3 files. Okay, so now I have more iterations in my data list, and I can even format this data list and we can look at the file paths, because I know a lot of you are working on networks, for example, and you might have files copied in various locations, and if that gets a little confusing, you can click this Show Full Path option right here, and then you can see that you have files coming from different folders. Okay, so that's actually a really important functionality, because not all softwares out there let you work with files from different folders, and you end up having to copy everything, and it takes up a lot of space on your hard drive. Okay, so probably that's enough for the data list right now. But just to show you, for some earlier versions of FCS Express, I think versions 3 and 4 do not have this iteration drop-down menu, but you can use this button right here in the data list. If I mouse over it, it's called Change File, and that'll do the same thing for you. So I can just click on, for instance, this one, this iteration, and say Change Data on All Plots, and now I'm on iteration 5. Okay, so whatever version of FCS Express you're working with, you can still jump around. Okay, are there any questions about the data list? Okay. If there are, just feel free to enter them in. I'm going to launch directly into a layout that's already been built, because that'll be a little bit more interesting for our batch process. Okay, so we're not going to talk about the details of inserting plots and applying gates and statistics and all those things, because that's all covered in our Getting Started webinar, which I believe is slated for this week. So that's why we're working with an already built layout. But basically this layout it hasn't had anything else done to it. It just has a data list with files, and we're going to start building our batch process together from scratch. Okay, so let's go to the Batch tab, and I'm going to click on Batch Actions here. And this is a dockable window, so I'm just going to move this over to the left so it stays out of my way. I think I'll put my data list inside there as well. Okay, so hopefully this is not too small for you to see, but again, these are all the choices that we have. So when we do our batch process, it's going to iterate through all of these data files in my data list, okay? And it's going to produce the same output for all of them. So, you know, 1 page per iteration on my printer, 1 slide per iteration, or in this case, 1 slide per FCS file for my PowerPoint export, 1 page for my PDF, okay, 1 picture if I choose to export pictures, and 1 column in my Excel export. I'm sorry, 1 row of data per iteration in my Excel export. Okay, so let's make these together, and then we'll take a look at what the outputs really look like, and I think it'll become clear how this works. Okay, so let's just start on down the line here. I'm going to add in a print action. Okay, here you can choose your printer. So I will send this to this HP printer here. Okay. Let's add in a PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint will give you a nice visual output. Okay, so I know this window is a little bit large. Let me draw your attention to the most important thing, and that is down here, Output File Options. Okay, so what we want to do is define our file path that we want to save the file to. So I'm going to click on the little folder here, and I'll put it on my desktop. And let's put it in this folder here, and I'm going to call this my results. Okay. If you want to, you can also check off this box up here to open the presentation after saving, so you don't have to go hunt it down later. It's right here, the second checkbox. Okay. Now let's add in a PDF. Oh, just to show you before I close that PowerPoint, we're going to leave this on the default, okay, for the PowerPoint. This radio button here says combine the output from all iterations into the same presentation. So that means we'll have one big PowerPoint file with the results from all 9 FCS files. Okay, you could, if you wanted to, save these separately, have a separate PowerPoint file for every FCS file, but I'm going to leave it on the default for this. Okay, let's also now set up a PDF. Okay, and in this case, the default is to save the output of each iteration separately. So we're going to have a separate PDF file for every one of our 9 FCS files. But if you wanted to, you could change it to the second radio button and have one big PDF file. It's totally up to you. Okay, so let's again come down here and define our file path. And I'm going to put that in the same folder on my desktop. I'll call it again results. Okay. Oh, and then just to note, the page range option up here, you could specify only certain pages that you want to export. I only have one page in this layout, so I'm just leaving it on all pages. Okay, so now if I click OK, I get an error message, and it just says, since I haven't specified a token in the output file name, this results.pdf down here, all iterations will have the same name and they'll overwrite each other. So what that means is it's just going to save results.pdf over and over again 9 times, and as you know, Windows or the Mac operating system cannot have the same file name. They can't have multiple files named identically in the same location. So let's correct that, and we'll just append this results.pdf here with a token from the data file itself. Okay, so I just clicked on T for token. We'll click on keyword. And the keywords, as you know, or as some of you know, is the metadata that came with your files at the time of acquisition. So you'll definitely have $file. That's a mandatory keyword. You could use that, or if you wanted to, you can scroll down and find more descriptive keywords. I'm going to use this sample ID. Okay, so when these PDFs are generated, these are going to be called results, and whatever the sample ID is for that particular FCS file, .pdf. Okay? So now when I click OK, it accepts that. It's letting me progress. So, and you know what? I'm going to do a quick save here, just because I don't want to lose this layout that we're building together. Okay, so let's also add a picture. And keep in mind, you're not going to probably do all these exports when you're doing your analysis. You'll probably only need one or a few of them at any one time, but I'm just going through the whole slew of options with you, so you'll know that they're available. Okay, so down here we can, in the select a plot area at the bottom, if you click on these various items, you can see a thumbnail of what the exported picture is going to look like. Okay, so let's select this dot plot here. That's the upper right dot plot, my CD8 versus CD4 dot plot. That's what I want to do. You can select your picture output options here. I think I'll export this as a JPEG. Okay, and I'm going to save this in that same folder on my desktop. And I'll give this a name .plot. Okay, and again, we don't want to have these files overwrite each other, so I'm going to add in a token to differentiate the file names as they're made. So let's put in a keyword. Okay, and maybe this time I'll just do the easy $ file, since you all will have that regardless of where your files are coming from, which cytometer. Okay? Great. So let's add one more, because I know that a lot of you are going to be exporting to Excel from time to time, even though you can do a lot of your statistical analysis and reporting graphs, bar plots and such in FCS Express, but there are times when you still need to go to Excel. So let's click on Excel, and for general use, this is an important distinction. When you're trying this on your own, you would want to do Excel column mode. That's the first of the 2 options. Excel cell mode is something that I'll try to get to a little bit later. That's not really something that the average user uses. It's more used in regulated environments where you're trying to export to a template Excel document that's already been formatted in a specific way for your lab. So I'm going to leave that alone for now. We're just going to do the basic column mode export. Okay, so what we want to do here again is set up our file path for exporting. So I'm going to put this again on my desktop. Okay, and I'll just call this my statistical results. There's a few other options here. I'm not going to get into those at the moment, but if any of you have questions about these other options, you can enter them in and we'll try to answer them in the course of the webinar. Okay, so we're almost done. We're almost ready to run our batch process here. Okay, but we still have to define what statistics we want to export to the Excel. So you can see if I right-click, for example, on this statistical table right here, there's about 15 or 20 default stats in this layout. And we have several gates already. So we have 5 or 6 gates here. So if we were to export, 6 gates times 20 stats, you'd have 120 columns of stats. And that's why FCS Express doesn't export all your stats by default, because then you'll get a spreadsheet that's just really too large to make sense of at a glance. So instead, what FCS Express has you do is define the stats that you want to export right now. Okay, and you can always change it later. You can come back and re-export, but we're going to first of all just decide what stats we want to put in. Okay, so you can do that easily by dragging and dropping. I can, for instance, drag this statistic from the statistical table over into Excel. Okay, and you see that the first stat that's going to be exported there is my statistic by percent gated cells for that M1 on the histogram. You can also drag and drop gates from plots. So for instance, I can drag this lymphs gate over here, or maybe let's drag the blasts gate instead. And I'm going to drag it directly into the Excel column mode item. Okay, and the software knows I want something to find off of blasts right here. I just have to tell it what I want. So I think in this case I'll put in number of events. Okay, if you have one of these nice custom built text tables that are on your layout already, you can just drag the entire layout by its border and drop that in, and then all of the stats come in. Okay, and you can also drag and drop multiple stats from one of these stat windows. Let me show you that. I'll put in a couple more columns here just to show you. Okay, so I can do, for example, a shift click and grab all of these and put all of those in. So now I'm going to have all those stats in by export. Okay, and so you can reorder these statistics as well. So right now this is going to be column A in my statistical export in Excel, column B, and so on. But you know what, I think I'm going to drag this keyword sample ID up so it's going to be column A. Okay, because that's basically my descriptor, right? When you do this dragging and dropping reordering, just make sure you drag to the left where the white space is. Otherwise you'll get this circle with the line through it saying you can't do it. Just as long as you drag it to the left up like this, then it will drag successfully. Okay? You can also drag other keywords to your Excel, so keywords that aren't even on your layout presently, just by dragging any plot by its border over to Excel and clicking on keyword token. And let's click on this ellipsis to get the list. All right, and so let's just grab this file name over here. New in FCS Express 6, you can hit Control and get multiple keywords or statistical tokens simultaneously. So maybe I want to grab the file name and let's say the cytometer. So I'll grab both of those at the same time. Okay, so now they're both there, and I'm going to just drag these up so that they're columns B and C in my export. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense so far. Are there any questions about setting up any of these exports so far? Okay. If there's no questions, I'm just going to go ahead and come back to the batch tab and click Run so we can see what these exports really look like. So on the batch tab, you have this lightning bolt here where it says Run. It's a lightning bolt because it's fast. FCS Express 6 was written to be very fast, so you should see it advance through your samples rather quickly. Okay, so here I go. I'm clicking Run. This is actually a dockable window in FCS Express 6, so I can move it over, and if I wanted to, I could still click around on the layout. Okay, but let me just move that back out. So it's going through, you see 2 of 5 actions and so on. The 5 actions are the print, PowerPoint, PDF, picture, and Excel. And then this bottom progress bar is 7 out of 9 iterations completed and so on. And the iterations in this case refers to the number of FCS files. Okay, so let's take a look at our Excel first. You can do a auto fit. Okay, so we have an Excel file with 1 column per item that we exported. So remember, column A was our sample ID, and then we dragged these other keywords up to be column B and C when we reordered the columns. And then we have a number of other columns for every statistic that we chose to export. Okay, so that's going to serve your needs in most cases. But like I said, I will talk about cell mode later if we have time. And you have 1 row of data for every iteration. Okay, so I have 9 rows of data. Okay, these titles for the columns will come through automatically in version 5 and version 6 of FCS Express. If you have an earlier version, you would have to go back and add these manually by accessing the field category. Okay, you can write to us at support if you need help with that. So let's close that. Okay. Let's take a look at our PowerPoint. Okay, well, first of all, you know what? Let me open up that file folder on my desktop, and I'll show you everything that was generated, and we'll launch it from there. Okay, so if you take a look at my file folder, we already looked at that Excel called statistical results here. Okay, we also have a PowerPoint file, which we'll look at next, a single PowerPoint file that has all of our results collated into it. And then we have separate PDF files for all of our PDFs, for all of our FCS files, okay? And you can see that the PDF files were appended with that sample ID, drug 1, 2, 3, and so on. Okay, and then we also have the dot plots that were saved as JPEGs. We have 1 dot plot per iteration, or in this case per FCS file, and those are appended with the file name. Remember, we put that token in. Okay, so let's open up that PowerPoint and see what that looks like. Okay, so I have 9 different slides because I had 9 iterations in my data list. And by the way, we do have new tiling options in version 6, like I said, where you can visually compress this into fewer slides. I'll get to that a little bit later, but this is just the basic batch process that some of you might already know and love from earlier versions of FCS Express. Okay, these are all exported as individual objects. That's the nice thing about exporting to PowerPoint. You can move them, resize them. And by the way, you can even grab files from, you can grab pictures from other layouts and just use the clipboard, copy, paste, Control-C, Control-V to paste them into PowerPoint. So it's actually really nice for building your presentations and such. So that step that we took to export the JPEG separately, in a lot of cases you don't need to do it, and I'm just showing it to you in case you want to do it nonetheless. So let's close that up. let's look at those pictures. Okay, so I can click on one of these pictures and scroll through. Okay, so we've got one JPEG generated per iteration. Okay, and lastly, let's just open up one of these PDFs and take a look. I'm going to open it up from the 7th iteration. Okay, so this is the PDF from the 7th iteration. You can see that it says drug 7 because it's the 7th iteration. Okay, and I have a separate PDF file for every iteration or every FCS file in this layout. Okay, does that make sense to all of you? Do you all have any questions about the logic of how these files were generated, what their relation is to the iterations in the data list? Okay, if there's no questions, let's take a look at a more complex case. I will in a moment show you how you can adjust the gates for each iteration, but I don't want to do that just yet, okay? Because first I want to show you how you can do batch processing even if you have a more complex case, okay? So in this example, I just have I just have one file per iteration. But let's say you have something more complicated where, for example, you have multiple files per iteration. So let's just open up that layout. Here we go. Okay, so this is an example, and I already have the batch processes set up, so we don't have to waste too much time doing that again, but I'm just going to show you the logic here. This layout has been defined as a panel, which, by the way, is available here on the batch tab. I'm not going to go through all the steps of setting up the panel because we do have a short video that'll take you through all those steps in just 3 minutes. But just briefly, if you click on panel, you can set up your panel to contain the number of tubes per iteration that you need. So this one's been set up to have 3 tubes per iteration, and you see each tube's been given a name, a B cell tube, NK cell tube, and a T cell tube. Okay, and that's going to allow us when we add in the tubes from the additional mice, because all of these tubes, as you can see from the file name, come from mouse 1, we can add in the tubes from the additional mice and the layout will advance through our data set in groups of 3 files. Okay, so that's an example of a 3 file per iteration layout. And yet you'll see the batching is going to work identically, okay, without any glitches. So let's put in the additional files. And I apologize, sometimes the hardest part is me remembering where the files are, but I'll be finding those in a moment. Okay, here we go. So these are the additional 6 files. I have 2 more files per mouse, and I have mouse 2 and 3, so it's 6 files total. So we'll just add these into the data list. Okay, and now I'm going to reorder these. I know this font's a little bit small for some of you to see. I apologize, I can't actually zoom in on the data list itself, but I'm going to reorder these file names so that they match the tube names. Okay, so this is B cells, that looks fine. Let's bring this NK cell tube up here, and this is the T cell from mouse 2. Okay, and now this looks like it's all in order, B, NKT, B, NKT, B, NKT. Okay, so now if I advance through my data set even without doing a batch, I'm just going to use the next previous buttons up here on the data list. And just to mention, next previous is your friend. It's a good idea to go next previous through your entire data list even before you run the batch, just to see how your data looks and if you forgot to add something to your layout at any point, okay? So I'm going next. Oh, looks like one of mine is out of order. Let me grab this one up here, push that up. I had some of the files mixed up. There we go. So this one goes up here. I apologize. Okay. Yeah, it looks like we're in business. So let me go next. And now you see we're looking at, take a look at the file names in each of the plots. These are the NK, T, and B cell tubes from mouse 2. I click next again, and it's those 3 tubes from mouse 3. Okay, so let's go back to the first iteration. And I'm going to click Run. And I think we put in a pause here, so I'm just going to run to end, and I'll explain how we put that pause in a moment. But you see, this batch process is generated in exactly the same way. So I have 3 slides because I had 3 iterations, even though each iteration consisted of 3 different tubes, a B cell tube, a T cell tube, and an NK cell tube. Okay? So let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to help any of you convert your layout to a panel if you wish. I know a lot of you might be doing complex analysis, and I think the panel could really come in handy for you. And combined with batching, it's a very powerful tool for completing your analysis. Okay, and here's the Excel file that came from that panel layout, and I think I can zoom in on this one so you can at least see. All right, so we have the file names that we chose to export and a stat for every iteration. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Do you all have any questions about that? Let me show you one more. You can even add overlays from multiple files. So like just coming back to this original layout that we've built together. Let's say we want to make this layout a little bit more complex because we want to look at a histogram overlay, from multiple files, okay? So let's say, for example, we look at this iteration and we're like, you know what, I think I really need to see a histogram overlay here. So let's grab this 4th file out and put a histogram onto the layout. And let's look at CD8. I don't think we've looked at a histogram of CD8 yet. Let me just keep this appropriately. Okay, so let's put in an overlay from the first file onto here. So even though we're looking at the 4th iteration, you can see it says drug 4 up here. I'm going to drag my first iteration onto here and make it an overlay. And I'm going to choose the second radio button, add the files to the plot as new overlays rather than replace. Okay, and now I'm going to come into my formatting options, right-click Format. Okay, and let me just apply a little bit of smoothing here, by the way. Okay, so basically, let's define this second overlay that I put in. Remember, that's the overlay from the first iteration. Let's pretend it's some sort of control, like an isotype control or something like that. What we can do is anchor that overlay so it doesn't participate in the batch, and we'll still be able to batch through all of our 9 iterations. So the button or the checkbox that you want to check in that case is this one, change data file during next previous batch. So we're going to uncheck that because I've highlighted this second overlay and I want that to remain stationary. Okay, we can even give it a sort of fill to identify it. Maybe I'll give it a green shaded fill. Okay, so you see in the plot at left, that one is now, that one I've defined as a control is a green hash mark fill. Okay, so now I can go back and forward through my data list, and you see that that green histogram overlay is stationary because it was anchored to not change, and yet the black one is reflecting the iteration that's highlighted in the data list right now. Okay, so these ones are both iteration 1. That's why you only see apparently 1 overlay. As I go to iteration 2 and so on, you can see the 2 overlays in there. Okay, and the batch process will still work. I can actually regenerate it for you if you want. That way you don't have to take my word for it. Let me just make sure that that PowerPoint is closed since I won't be able to overwrite it if it's open. Okay, so let's click Run. Okay, so you can see, again, we have the 9 slides in our PowerPoint export, and we have a different result for each one. Okay, and then that histogram came through just fine. All right, so hopefully I've convinced you that batch processing is a powerful tool, and it can definitely handle any kind of scenario that you throw at it. Okay, I'm going to delete that for now because now I want to come into batch options and show you how we can define different gating positions for every sample, okay? Because I have a feeling that might be the question on a lot of people's lips, okay? So I'm coming into batch options on the batch tab, and there's a few different options in here. Let's just talk about this first one here because this is probably what you're going to use in the most typical case, and it's called unconditionally pause between iterations. So if I check this checkbox, when I run the batch, and let me just close all of these so I can actually overwrite it. Okay, good. So now when I run the batch, it's going to stop on every iteration and allow me to adjust the gates. Okay, so let's click run. Let's see how that works. Okay, so now you see it's advanced to the second iteration, and it's going to let me change the gating position. So let's make this CD8 gate a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter around the cells. Okay, and then you have the choice over here to keep that change, okay, or to restore the state of the layout before the next iteration. So I'm going to choose the latter because I want to go back to that baseline gating position. Okay, so you'll see that that gate is going to jump back when I click continue. Okay, so you see that CD8 gate became larger again rather. All right, let's make the CD4 gate a little more narrow, and I'm just going to make a really obvious change so that it comes through really easily. It's easily seen on the PowerPoint. Okay, so now I'm going to click continue. Okay, and so it'll continue to pause on each iteration, but I'm just going to click run to end so we could just zoom through the final 5 iterations because I think you get the idea. So here's our PowerPoint, and that's the first iteration. Now I'll click to the second iteration. You see I made that CD8 gate smaller, right? Let's go to the third iteration. You see I made this orange lymph gate bizarrely large. And now we go back to the fifth iteration, the next iteration rather, and all the gates went back to their original position. Okay, and all those changes are going to be reflected in the other exports that we made as well. So I can open up the recent places. Okay, and I won't actually open all of these, but that they're all there as well. Actually, no, I unchecked the other ones, so we only generated the PowerPoint in that case, but you can overwrite those as well. I see a question, can we change the axes too in each iteration and replace gates? Yes, you absolutely can. During that pause, you can do whatever you want. You can add new text boxes, new plots. Yes. Okay, let's talk about how we can review these changes that we've made. So in version 5 and version 6 of FCS Express, you can actually remember the gating changes that you made during the pause and just reproduce them at any time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, let's say that it's another day and I just want to come back and see what gate changes I made yesterday. So instead of clicking run, remember all my batch processes are lined up, I can just click rerun. All right, so rerun is going to regenerate the batch processes again with the exact same gate changes. So I click rerun. Okay, watch what happens when I click continue. Keep an eye on that aqua colored CD8 gate in the upper right. You see it got large again, so did this orange lymph gate. Continue. Okay, so I think you get the idea. So even if you close this layout and open it, as long as you hit save, it's going to remember those changes for you. Okay, and there's that layout again. So let's just close that PowerPoint file. Okay, so Another thing you can click is review. Like let's say you just want to see the changes that you made, but you don't want to actually overwrite the export. Just click review on the batch tab. Okay, and as long as you have that pause enabled, it's going to allow you to just click continue and you sort of get a preview of what you did. Or I guess I should say review of what you did. Okay, so are there any questions about those batch options there on the batch tab? Okay, let me just make a note that you can use next previous to see those gating changes as well. But if you just click next previous, it's going to be like an old style, old-fashioned next previous, and these gates are going to stay stationary. If you actually want to see those snapshots, so those gating changes you made during the batch are called snapshots, you can click on Apply Iteration Snapshot on the Tools menu. And when that's enabled, now when you click Next Previous, it's going to show you the gate changes you made, right? So this limps gate is large. Now it's going back to normal. Okay? If I turn off Apply Iteration Snapshots, you're going to get this message saying it's going to erase all your iteration snapshots. You can just say yes. Okay, and now I go back and forth, and you see that basically cleared those gating changes, okay? So we do have a lot of documentation about working with snapshots. I'm not going to go more into detail here, but it is relevant for your batch processing, so that's why we've touched on it here, okay? Do you all have any questions about that? There's a couple more options I want to show you. Here under batch options, remember we already did this unconditionally pause between iterations. There's a few other options as well. You can pause on flagged iterations. You can pause if the condition below is met. Okay, so let's do that. Let's pause if, for example, my CD4 gate on this color dot plot here. So I'm going to change this to CD4 % of gated cells is greater than 50. Okay, and let's say I also want to pause on flagged iterations, and I'll show you how you can flag iterations manually in a moment. And we also want to pause on specific iterations. So let's say we want to pause on iteration 8, okay? Or you can pause on a range of iterations. So I'm going to click OK, and let's show you how we can flag certain iterations. So let's say I want to flag this iteration right here. Okay, this is iteration 3. So while we're on iteration 3, you can just click the flag up here on the data list, the data tab, and you see it goes from a grayed out, slightly desaturated flag to a red high flying flag. Okay, so now let's go back to our first iteration, and let me just double check my batch options. Yep, so I've got those 3 checked. Okay, and now we can click run, and it's going to pause where appropriate. So now it's pausing on the 3rd iteration because it's flagged, and it's giving me a chance to adjust the gate. Okay, I'm going to do continue. Okay, and remember, I actually keep the changes enabled here. That's why that's staying stationary. So it's stopping on the 6th iteration because the CD4 is above 50%. Okay, so it's at 54%. So I'll hit continue, and the next iteration to stop on is 8 because we just wrote down that it should specifically stop on that. Okay, so I'm going to just hit cancel, but I think you get the idea of how those options work. Okay, so now comes a kind of cool part of the webinar where I can show you something new and exciting in version 6, and that's the tiling options. So I'm going to click on PowerPoint, although I will note that the tiling options I'm about to show you, they're there for PDF as well, and they're also there for your print, so you can print directly to the printer. So all of your visual outputs, you're going to have these new tiling options that allow you to export multiple iterations per slide or per page of your PDF or printer, okay? And that'll sort of compress the results for you visually, help you save paper, whatever you're trying to do. All right. So the tiling options are here under export options. So before I actually run the tiling options, let me explain to you the options that are available to you. So under mode, there's this drop-down menu. And like I said earlier, this is basically analogous to printing multiple pages per page on a printer. So you can do the default, which is what we're already accustomed to, full page, and that's where you'll have one iteration per slide of your PowerPoint or per page of your PDF. Or you can do 2 pages per slide, 3 pages with notes. That'll keep like an empty part of the slide on the right-hand side so you can enter in your notes manually. And then you have these various pages, horizontal or vertical. So, and that just refers to the order that the iterations are filled on the slide. So horizontal means you'll have iteration 1, 2, 3 going across, then it goes down to the next, well, in this case it's 4 pages horizontal. So you'll have iterations 1, 2, 3, 4 in one row, then the second row will be 5 through 8 and so on. Whereas 4 pages vertical will have iterations 1 through 4 going down the first column, then 5 through 8 down the second column. Okay, does that make sense? So let me just choose one of these arbitrarily. I think I'll choose, 4 pages horizontal. Okay. You have these other options here to frame the page, and that'll draw a nice frame around each iteration. So I guess I can click that and show you. Okay. And cropped content I'll show you in a moment, but that basically crops out the white space if you have any in your layout page. Okay, so when you are using this option, you need to be careful to select this new third radio button here under iteration options. Okay, and that is called combine the output from all iterations into a single file without page break. And don't worry too much about the technicality, it just enables you to use that mode drop-down menu that I just showed you. Okay, so do you all have any questions? Probably not until I show you, right? So I'm going to click OK. But you know what? I'm going to, let me give this a new name. Although I think it's fine. Yeah, that layout is, that PowerPoint's closed, so I should be able to overwrite it. So let's click OK, and I'm going to click Run. Okay, and I'm just going to click Run to End because I'm not going to bother adjusting the gates in this case. Okay, so you see we chose 4 pages horizontal. And let me zoom in a little more so you can actually see the text here. So since we had 9 iterations and we chose 4 pages horizontal, we have iterations 1 through 4 on the first slide, 5 through 8 on the second slide, and iteration 9 all by itself on the third slide here. Okay, so we have the first iteration here, the second iteration right beside it, then we go down to the next row and we have iterations 3 and 4. All right, so you see that it's nice, it compresses your results a little bit more if you don't want to have 1 slide per iteration. So let's close that. Okay, let me come back in and show you. I actually didn't select frame page there, that's why the frame didn't come through, but I'll select it on the next option. So the next option you have is custom grid, and that allows you to, as you can imagine, define your grid dimensions. So we'll click on the ellipsis here, and we have 9 iterations, so let's do something kind of logical here. Why don't we do 2 columns and 3 rows? Okay, so then we'll have about 1.5 slides filled. I would just leave this gap mode alone. It just allows you to change it to a minimal gap or auto. I usually leave it on auto. And you can change this to vertical if you want to. I'll just show you that that works as well. Okay, and in this case I'm going to click frame page and you'll see that frame coming through around each iteration. And let's click Run. And I'm just going to run to end because I don't want to bother with changing those gates again. Okay, so you can see, like I said, we have about 1.5 slides set, exported here in our PowerPoint. And in this case, every iteration has a a frame drawn around it, and the frame corresponds to the size of the page. So if you have some items spilling off of the page, you're going to see it extending beyond the frame. So you can adjust that in your layout, or you can always move it here, but it's probably more efficient to adjust it in your layout to begin with. Okay, and in this case we're going downwards as we fill the grid. So we have the first iteration here in the upper left. Probably that's too small for you to see. Let me zoom in quite a bit. Okay, and this is the second iteration. Now let's go to the top of the page, and that's the first iteration. Okay, let me show you crop to content. I'm not going to actually export it because I know we're getting low on time here, and I definitely want to leave some time for questions. But I have those pre-generated for you. But basically, this crop to content option right here will crop out the white space from your layout in the export. Okay, so let me show you those because I have those open just to save us some time. So this is the regular one. This is not cropped. You can see there's some white space at the bottom of each iteration. Now I click on this one, which was exported identically except crop to content was activated, and you see it's cropping out that space at the bottom. Okay, so play around with those. I think you'll find that it's useful if you have a lot of samples or you just want a rather small printout for your notebook or something like that. Those new tiling options can come in handy for you. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. I do see one question about choosing one plot per sample. Absolutely, but in that case I would probably take this sample, I would take this plot, put it on another page, and then in your batch actions you can choose to only export page 2. Okay, or you could of course delete the extraneous plots from your layout, but you probably don't want to do that. Okay, so yes, you can set up the batch to export whatever content you want. Okay, remember I said I was going to get back to Excel cell mode. I do have a few minutes to show you that. I know the vast majority of you don't need to use it, but I'm happy to show it to you. But I first want to ask, do you all have any questions about anything I've shown so far? We've gone through a lot of different things, so feel free to ask. Okay. Does anybody want to see the Excel cell mode? If you do, just type it into the questions and answer box, because I'm not going to show it if you're not interested in it, because we do have documentation about it online. Okay, I see one person's interested, so let me show you Excel cell mode. Yep, we've got a couple of takers. So I have a layout that's already almost built. So this layout's got a batch process lined up. You can see it has a cell mode lined up. And let me show you the template document. So Excel cell mode is different than Excel column mode. Column mode basically allows you to, like I showed you before, you have one row of data per iteration. But Excel cell mode is much more regimented. So you need a pre-made template. This one is called Batch Webinar Cell Mode Template. And it's basically predefined. So it's got all these formatting features that have already been built into the Excel by the author. And for instance, you might have the lab logo. It's used in for example, regimented environments where you need a very specific output that maybe matches other Excel templates or Excel forms that you have in your organization. Okay, so I would say the average researcher probably doesn't need to use this, but there are a couple of bells and whistles you can do with cell mode that you can't do with column mode, which I'll show you. So basically it's got these tables put in, which are not mandatory, but if you're using cell mode, you probably do have tables, just because that's the whole point, is that you have the report looking nice and neat, exactly how you want it to look. Okay, so we're going to export to this template. And so if I double click on this Excel cell mode, which you could get from right here under Add Report, you see that the template document has been specified here under Template Document. And you still need to save to a new file. So you don't want to overwrite that template document. I actually don't think you could do that. So you'll set up your file just as you did before, like I showed you with the column mode, okay? And then you'll drag stats over just like you did before. So let's, for instance, drag the CD4-CD8 ratio over like this, okay? The only difference is you're going to need to double-click on it and come down to Field and specify the cell address. Okay, so that CD4-CD8 ratio, I can refer to my template and see where it should go. It needs to go right here in cell D8. So let's type in Field D8, okay? And we're going to also put in a picture of this CD8, CD4 dot plot. And again, let's refer to our template and see where we want that to go. So it looks like this cell's empty, B16. So I'm going to put it in B16, so it goes right under this descriptor right here. So you can click on Excel cell mode and click on picture, and then remember these thumbnails. You can click on the appropriate thumbnail, and we're going to come down to Field and type in that cell address, B16. Okay, and so we have these 3 iterations in the data list. So let's click Run. Okay, so this is a little different. We don't have 1 row per iteration, but we have 1 worksheet per iteration. So we have 3 different worksheets. That's how this was set up. Okay, and you see that it's filled with the appropriate stats or the plot for that particular iteration. So this is the first iteration. You see it says drug 1. Okay, and now we go down to the second worksheet, and then that's drug 2. Okay, does that all make sense? So that's Excel cell mode for you. We do have, I think we even have a short video about that, and that gives me a chance to show you the support resources that are available for you. So you can click on Video Guide, and that'll launch a bank of short videos. And we have ones on batch processing. This is a 3-minute video that kind of shows you the basics of what I've showed you today, but in a much shorter time with a little bit less detail. Okay, you can also click on Help and Manual right here, and that'll launch a written resources with tutorials and a searchable manual. So I can type in batch options, for example, and you have all these different results coming up. So you can click on the one that you want. You can come down to Contents, Tutorials, and I believe we do have one specifically about batch processing, and we'll take you through a step-by-step tutorial of all these various batch processing reports you can make. Okay, and last but not least, we definitely encourage you to click on Support, and that will open up our support web page on our website that has our contact information. And you can write to us at support@denovosoftware.com. We usually try to get back to you within 24 hours, many times much quicker. And you can also request a live screen share where we can take a look at your layout and troubleshoot it with you on a GoToMeeting, which is a lot like this webinar we're doing today, except you'll be able to chat with us as well, verbally. Okay, so those help resources are available for you. While I'm on the website, please download the demo of version 6 if you haven't. That's right here under Download, denovosoftware.com or FCSExpress.com. Just click on Download FCS Express Demo, and then you can click on this button to download the demo. Okay, so let me just take, although we're running over, I'll just wrap up a little bit and review what we did. We created a simple layout, and we batched to Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, and printer. We did a more complex layout with multiple overlays or multiple files per iterations. And we used batch options, batch run modes, and snapshots to change the gates and remember the gating changes we made for every sample. We talked about the new tiling options to visually compress your exports onto fewer slides or pages. And oh, I forgot to show you reusing the layout as a template for future experiments. Okay, let me show you that real quick. I know some of you are still on the line, so for example, we can take this layout that we built together, okay, and I'm just going to, there's a couple ways to do it, but I'll show you how you can save this as an empty template. So I'm going to save this as webinar layout template, and I'm going to change the option here to unlinked. Let's close it down and reopen that one. Whoops. Okay, so you see the plots come out empty, and then I can just load in my new files into the data list. So for example, let's work with these different files that we didn't work with before. Okay, and let's just double click on this to load that in. And you see now we have our layout ready to go, except with these new data files from the due day. Okay, so I apologize, I forgot to show you that. But yeah, getting back to the summary, I think we went through a lot of things, and we're certainly happy to help all of you. And I know we're running over, so I will keep the webinar open for a few more minutes for those of you who have questions. But for those of you who have to go, thank you so much for joining us today. We really enjoyed having you, and it was great to get all your questions. And please do join us for future webinars. We have a few more coming up. And let us know if you have any questions. We'll be happy to hear from you at any time at support@denovosoftware.com. I am keeping this open because I know some of you do have some questions. So one person has a question about linked and unlinked. Yes, let me launch into that real quick. So if you go File, Save As, so linked is the default, and it's basically the layout remembers where your data files are. As long as you don't change the location of either one, it'll open up without issue. Embedded saves the layout with the data files that are currently showing on the plots, but not the entire data list. So that's good if you just want to kind of send somebody that particular data file in plots. You can save it embedded and send it to them. And unlinked is what I just showed you, the template, where the plots come up empty. And that's good if you want to reuse that layout over and over again, and that way you don't have to kick out the old files manually. So one person wrote, if they save it as linked, they sometimes lose their data. That probably means that the location of either your FCS files or the layout has changed. So you can either try to not change those around, or you can just follow the prompts. So if you open up the layout and the FCS files have moved their relative location, a little prompt window will ask you to find the new location of the layout of the files. And you can just follow those prompts as written, and it'll load in without issue. Okay, one person had a question about canned comments. So if canned comments are in one iteration and not the next, or they cannot be cleared, they should only really be showing up conditionally in most cases. We might have to take a look at your layout and help you troubleshoot that. So we can follow up with you afterwards. I believe we have your email. Or you can write to us at support@denovosoftware.com with this specific question. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thanks again so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time for those of you who have to go. I don't believe there's one question about tracking the amount of time the layout is open. With a standard configuration, I don't think there is, but it might be possible with a security configuration. So if you have that with your lab, that might be possible. Let me look into that, and we'll follow up with you about that as well. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon or evening, as the case may be. Bye-bye.